$8,000. That was the price whispered in the dark, the cost of saving a brother or the reason to betray an entire theater. Harlan West froze outside the lobby, the words striking harder than any boardroom battle. Behind the poster, Rachel's voice cracked, "If I don't pay, Daniel's legs are gone." Sophia answered, barely breathing, "Then we take it from the safe." His empire, built over 20 years, was now the target of desperation. He turned toward the restroom mirror, catching sight of himself in the janitor's disguise. A CEO reduced to a shadow clutching a mop instead of power. The reflection didn't matter. What he had overheard did. Not petty complaints, not low wages, but theft planned by the very employees who once shined brightest. 24 hours, one decision: stop them and destroy them, or let them fall and risk losing everything. The clock had started. Rachel's smile never faltered, even as the hour dragged past closing. She handed out tickets, thanked each customer, and carried the weight of exhaustion in silence. The granola bar hidden in her pocket was dinner chewed quickly between greetings, swallowed dry as though shameful. Her hands, once soft, now bore rough calluses from shifts stacked one on another. Midnight glowed on the clock, yet she lingered. Others clocked out and vanished into the night, but Rachel stayed behind, broom in hand, polishing counters no one would notice. Her reflection on the stainless steel was faint, but her resolve was sharp. The world might never see her sacrifices, but her body felt every bruise. Her footsteps echoed through the empty lobby, steady, dutiful, never loud enough to betray her weariness. Alone in the half-light, she bent over each surface as though perfection would hold her fragile life together. Rachel was more than reliable. She was relentless, gowned in exhaustion fueled only by necessity. The ticket machine blinked red, a customer's temper rising with each failed attempt. Sophia stepped forward, calm, careful, pressing keys, smoothing nerves. But the error persisted. Murmurs sharpened into accusations, and before the machine reset, Derek's voice cut through, "You broke it." He did not look at the wires, did not check the system. He looked only at her. Without hesitation, he demanded restitution. $5. Now. Her cheeks burned as she reached into her pocket, pulling out her own money to appease both him and the crowd. No apology followed, only the weight of his disdain. She returned to her post, eyes low breath, shallow, swallowing anger and tears alike. Her uniform carried no stain, yet humiliation clung like dirt that water could never wash away. In the quiet between sales, she pressed her lips together and forced composure, because breaking would mean losing the one thread she had left her job. A crash of popcorn scattered across the tiled floor, kernels bouncing like guilty secrets. Derek's roar followed, instantly louder than the noise itself. He summoned the staff into a circle, the air thick with fear. One mistake had become a spectacle. His words were not correction, but punishment, sharp whips disguised as management. He threatened hours' wages, even livelihoods. "Fall short again, and I cut your shifts." His gaze swept over each bowed head, daring anyone to protest. Silence was safer than truth. Then he delivered his creed, chilling in its clarity. "Customers aren't your friends. They're wallets. Nothing more." No one moved. Nods passed like chains from one neck to the next. The room stilled, not from respect, but from survival. Under Derek's rule, obedience was currency and dignity had no price. In that moment, every employee shrank smaller, their value reduced to numbers he alone controlled. Jason stood at the edge of the staff, meeting his hands, trembling as he spoke. "Sir, I need next Saturday off. It's my wedding." His voice cracked under the weight of desperation, but Derek didn't flinch. He leaned back, arms folded, tone cutting through the air. "Work first, family second. Don't like it, quit." The words fell like a verdict, cold and final. Jason's eyes welled, his lips parted as though he might resist, but no courage came. He lowered his head, nodded once, and stepped back. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Around him, his co-workers looked on, their faces pale, their gazes hollow. No one spoke. No one dared. In that shared silence, the truth hardened. Derek's word was law, and humanity had no place here. Jason's humiliation became theirs, a collective wound that bled in silence. Eyes shifted toward the ground, each one reflecting the same question. If even marriage doesn't matter, what hope is left for the rest of us? Rachel leaned against the bathroom sink, shoulders sagging under invisible weight. The amber bottle rattled in her hand, pills clinking against plastic like faint alarms. She twisted the cap, and one slipped free, striking the tile with a sharp echo. For a moment she stared at it, too weak to bend, then dropped to her knees, snatched it up, and swallowed dry. Her chest rose sharply, lungs desperate for steadiness. The phone buzzed on the counter. A message from the hospital. Daniel's therapy scheduled for next week, payment required before treatment. Her vision blurred as the words seared into her mind. She gripped the sink knuckles, white, whispering his name like a prayer she could not afford. In that cramped, sterile space she looked less like an employee and more like a soldier in retreat, fighting pain, fighting poverty, fighting inevitability. Her body was breaking. Her spirit frayed. Yet she pushed herself upright, wiped her face, and prepared to walk out as though nothing was wrong. Through the glass pane, Harlan moved, slowly wiping in circles the rag disguising his intent. Rachel's voice carried through the air, thin and strained. "Don't worry, Daniel. I'll find the money. I promise." The silence that followed was heavier than her words. She sniffled, then quickly wiped her cheeks, forcing composure before stepping back into view of customers. Harlan froze his grip, tightening around the mop handle until his knuckles burned. A single tear she fought to hide told him more than any report could. He had read complaints about morale, about unfair hours, but now he saw the truth with his own eyes. This wasn't laziness, wasn't entitlement. This was survival pressed into uniform. His chest tightened as he watched her gather herself, shoulders squared against an uncaring world. For the first time, anger toward Derek flared sharp in his mind. A line had been crossed, and though he said nothing, the thought settled deep. This was no longer just observation. It was becoming personal. Sophia slipped beside Rachel as the lobby thinned, her whisper carrying a weight too heavy for the air. "There's a way," she said, voice trembling. "But it's dangerous." Rachel's head shook slowly, denial on her lips, but not in her eyes. Silence stretched between them, a silence that spoke of exhaustion, of fear of love, twisted into desperation. Rachel's gaze wavered, torn between survival and ruin. Sophia's eyes mirrored hers, heavy with resolve, heavy with dread. The two young women stood together, but the shadows pressed closer, thickening around them like a secret they could not contain. Each unspoken word deepened the darkness that hung over their shoulders. A decision was forming, not chosen freely, but forced by circumstance. Harlan lingered only steps away, mop in hand, heart thudding as he caught every syllable. He had come looking for low morale, perhaps poor training, but he found something far more dangerous. Plans. Fear. Desperation so deep it whispered of crime. The theater he had built was becoming a stage for betrayal. The next morning, Derek stood before the staff, arms crossed, voice slicing through the room. "From now on, if you help a customer off the clock, your hours are cut." The words landed like a sentence. Rachel gasped, the instinct to object slipping past her lips. Derek turned instantly, eyes flashing. "Do you want fewer hours? Say another word." She shrank under his glare, cheeks burning. Sophia reached for her hand under the counter, squeezing gently, pleading silently for silence. The room grew still. The rule now etched into their lives: kindness meant punishment. Harlan's chest tightened, the rag in his hand, twisting as fury swelled. This was the culture now, his culture twisted beyond recognition. A policy that forbade compassion, a workplace that punished humanity. His jaw clenched as he thought, "This is no longer my theater, not the one I built." The contradiction screamed louder than Derek's threats. Decency was now a liability. A place of community had become a place of cruelty. Midnight struck, and the theater emptied. Rachel lingered, weary eyes fixed on Derek as he shoved a mop into her hands. Bathrooms? All of them. No pay. Do it or lose your shifts. His voice left no room for appeal. She obeyed, dragging her tired body into the tiled silence. Each scrub of the brush was soaked in tears, her quiet sobs echoing against the porcelain walls. Her shoulders trembled, her breath shallow, yet she continued, bound not by loyalty, but by fear. Minutes later, Sophia appeared, slipping into the room and kneeling beside her. She placed a hand on Rachel's arm, whispering comfort neither could believe. "You're not alone," she said softly, though the truth felt otherwise. Beyond the doorway, Harlan lingered in shadow, unseen, watching the cruelty unfold. His chest ached, his fists tightened, yet he held back. Revealing himself too soon would shatter the fragile mask he wore. Instead, he absorbed the image of one woman broken, another clinging, and the empire he had built collapsing in silence. The phone buzzed in Rachel's hand, the glow of the screen cutting through the dim break room. She opened the message and her blood ran cold. A photo of Daniel in his hospital bed, tubes trailing from his fragile body. Beneath it, words carved like a threat etched in stone: tomorrow. No money, and I'll come for him. Her breath caught hands trembling so violently the phone slipped clattering to the floor. She gasped as though her lungs had collapsed, eyes wide in horror. Sophia bent quickly, picking up the device, her face blanching as she read the same words. Fear painted her pale, her voice no louder than a whisper. There's no other way now. The room shrank around them, the air pressed tight against their skin. This was no longer about missed shifts or cruel managers. This was survival sharpened into an ultimatum. Rachel pressed her fists to her chest, torn between terror and determination, knowing a choice had been forced on her. And it would change everything. In the office corridor, Derek leaned against the doorframe, voice dripping with arrogance as he spoke to his assistant. The old man believes every number I send. He's blind easy. I trim what I want, report what I want. No one questions me. His laugh was low, greedy. Harlan stood a few feet away, rag in hand, polishing the same spot on the glass for too long. Each word struck like a hammer. So the rumors were true. Not just poor leadership. Theft, manipulation, fraud. The theater he had built with pride was bleeding from the inside, bled by the very man he had trusted to run it. His chest thudded, hard pulse quickening as rage simmered beneath his disguise. He slid the notebook from his pocket and scrawled fast each letter, jagged, full investigation needed. The words were not mere notes, they were promises. He tucked it away, face composed, but his grip on the rag trembled. Derek's gloating had given him clarity. The rot was deeper than he feared. That evening, Rachel lingered near the concession stand, her eyes fixed on the office door. Derek strode inside, barking at someone unseen. The safe clicked open moments later, its metallic keypad glowing faintly. Rachel edged closer, every nerve taut, pretending to tidy the counter. She leaned just enough to watch his fingers move. One number, then another. Her breath hitched. She pressed the sequence onto her palm with her fingernail red lines forming against her skin. Behind her, Sophia kept guard, scanning the hall, her heart hammering loud enough she thought Derek might hear. When the office door shut, Rachel exhaled raggedly, her fist closing around the numbers etched on her flesh. The code was hers now. The impossible suddenly tangible. In the shadows, Harlan pushed his mop forward, eyes sharp, though his head stayed low. He had seen everything. They didn't know. They thought secrecy protected them. But he had the truth, and with it the knowledge that time was collapsing fast. The countdown had already begun. Jason slumped against the counter, his voice low, laced with bitterness. He cut my pay again. Said the register was short, but I know it wasn't. His words trembled with anger and helplessness. Rachel placed a hand on his arm, whispering what little comfort she could manage. You'll get through this. Just keep your head down. But her own chest was heavy, the lie choking her throat. Around them, others moved in silence, their faces drawn, shoulders hunched, each one carrying the same unspoken truth: they were all victims. Nobody dared challenge Derek. The threat of losing hours, losing work, losing survival, it pressed against every ribcage, strangled every protest before it formed. The air in the theater thickened, stale with fear and resignation. Rachel's gaze swept across her co-worker's eyes, cast downward, lips pressed, thin hope draining with every shift. This wasn't one man's misfortune. It was a system built on silence, rotting from the top down, trapping them all inside. Sophia leaned over the faded floor plan taped to the break room wall, her finger tracing the weak points. Camera in Sector B hasn't worked in weeks, she murmured. And Mike always leaves at 10:45 for his smoke. That gives us exactly 12 minutes. Her words hung in the air, sharp and precise. Rachel swallowed hard, the sound loud in her own ears. 12 minutes. The number circled in her mind, both terrifying and tempting. The path was suddenly clear, mapped out in stolen glances and broken equipment. Sophia's eyes burned with determination, but Rachel's shook with fear. The thought of Daniel's fragile body, of Kane's threats, shoved her closer to the edge. Their breaths matched, shallow, uneven, as if the plan itself had already stolen their air. Across the room, the clock ticked, steady and different. The theater carried on as normal, but between the two girls a dangerous countdown had begun, each second drawing them nearer to a choice that could never be undone. Derek slapped a paper onto the counter, the word "warning" stamped across the top in harsh red. "Sign it," he barked. Rachel's hands shook as she skimmed the accusation, "poor sales performance." Her throat tightened. I was helping an elderly woman. She fell. She needed me. Her plea fractured mid-sentence. Derek's laugh was sharp, cruel. Did she pay your bills? Did she cover your losses? No. Then shut up and sign. Tears blurred Rachel's vision as the pen scratched her name at the bottom, sealing her own condemnation. The humiliation burned hotter than the tears streaming down her cheeks. Around them, whispers died in throats, no one daring to intervene. In the corner, Harlan froze mop handle slick with sweat in his grip. His chest surged with fury, his disguise almost falling away as he watched her surrender to a lie. The paper fluttered slightly on the counter, a weapon Derek wielded without shame, proof that in this place compassion was punished and cruelty crowned king. In the dim storage room, the scent of cardboard and dust hung heavy. Sophia closed the door behind her, her voice steady but edged with desperation. "We have to do it." Rachel's back stiffened, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron. "And if we're caught?" The question trembled, fragile as glass. Sophia stepped closer, eyes fierce with conviction. "Then at least Daniel has a chance." Her words pierced through the fog of fear slicing into Rachel's heart. For a moment, silence pressed between them, thick with unspoken dread. Then slowly, Rachel extended her hand. Sophia clasped it tightly, their fingers entwined in a pact neither dared to break. The air between them shifted, no longer just co-workers but conspirators bound by necessity. Harlan, hidden nearby with his mop, heard every word. His chest tightened not with anger but with the ache of recognition. Desperation had cornered them, and now the girls were stepping over a line from which there was no return. That night, when the theater finally hushed, Harlan slipped into a side corridor, pulling his phone from his pocket. His voice was low, deliberate. "Get me everything on Victor Kane. Background, associates, debts, violence." Minutes later, confirmation buzzed back, records of broken bones, unpaid loans, threats carved into the lives of families just like Rachel's. The name alone carried fear, a predator feeding on the vulnerable. Harlan's hand trembled as he scrolled through the evidence, but his resolve only hardened. He could move, now expose everything, but instinct told him to wait. The puzzle wasn't complete. He needed to see how far this went, how deep Derek's negligence and Kane's influence truly ran. For now, he would keep his disguise intact, eyes open, ears sharper than ever. The weight of the information pressed heavy, but he carried it alone. In the silence of the hallway, his decision sharpened into steel observation, first, then action. And when he moved, there would be no undoing it. The next evening, Derek's cruelty cut deeper. He slapped a note onto the counter. $10 missing. You pay it back. Rachel's face blanched. Before she could protest, he shoved a mop into her hands. Men's bathroom. Now. Her body sagged under the insult, but she obeyed. Minutes later, Sophia pushed open the door to find Rachel hunched over the sink, retching into the bowl, her sobs muffled by the tiles. "I can't do this anymore." Rachel gasped, clutching the porcelain as though it could anchor her. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her strength unraveling with each word. Sophia crouched beside her, wrapping arms around trembling shoulders. "Yes, you can," she whispered, firm, yet tender. "Tomorrow night. It ends. All of it." Rachel buried her face against her friend's shoulder, the sobs shaking her frail frame. Sophia held on tightly, her own fear masked by determination. For both of them, the line had been crossed. Tomorrow was no longer a plan. It was destiny. In the narrow hallway, the security guard Mike approached Derek with a clipboard in hand, his tone weary but firm. "The back camera in Sector B is still out. It's been weeks. If something happens, no one will see it." Derek didn't even glance at the paper. He waved a dismissive hand, his mouth twisted into a smirk. "Too expensive." "Forget it. Just walk by more often." His indifference stung sharper than insult. It was negligence dressed as authority. Harlan bent over nearby with his mop, caught every word. He scribbled into his notebook, the ink pressed deep into the page. Safety ignored. Liability. His jaw clenched as the truth crystallized. Derek's carelessness wasn't just cruel to staff, it endangered everyone, employees, customers, the company itself. Cameras broken, warnings dismissed. A perfect blind spot carved not by accident, but by arrogance. For Harlan, the evidence was undeniable. Derek wasn't just unfit, he was the rot hollowing the core of everything built. And now Harlan's patience thinned to a razor's edge. The concession stand was quiet, the last customers gone. Rachel leaned close, her whisper trembling. "Tomorrow night. The final shift." Sophia's eyes flickered and she nodded once, sharp and steady. "We'll have 12 minutes. Not a second more. We can't afford a mistake." The air between them tightened heavy with a pact sealed in silence. Their hands found each other, fingers entwined, holding fast against the storm to come. Just steps away, Harlan wiped the counter, pretending not to hear, though every word pierced his chest. The idea of two young women planning theft in the empire he built because they had no other choice sank into him like a blade. His heart ached not only for the betrayal, but for the desperation that drove it. He looked down at his disguise, the mop, the rags, and felt the weight of decision pressing harder with every breath. Time was running out. For them. For him. For the theater itself. The morning meeting gathered the staff in a tired half-circle, their eyes dull with fatigue. Derek stood before them, voice sharp enough to cut. Yesterday's numbers were pathetic. Too low. From now on, shifts will be cut. If you can't sell, you don't work. The words rippled like shockwaves. Rachel's face blanched, her lips pressed tight as panic rushed in. Sophia's grip on her pen tightened until it nearly snapped. Around them, shoulders hunched, heads lowered, silence the only shield left against his cruelty. The air thickened, suffocating, as though the walls themselves leaned in with threat. Derek thrived in the fear, his grin thin, his tone final. The staff nodded because they had to, not because they agreed. In the corner, Harlan kept still, rag in hand, eyes burning. Every insult piled higher, every humiliation stoked the fury gathering in his chest. He said nothing, but within him something dark coiled tighter. This theater was no longer sick, it was poisoned. And soon he would act. Rachel pressed the phone to her ear, her voice cracked by tears. "Please, just a few more days." The reply came cold, mocking, Victor Kane's laugh echoing like steel against bone. "Tomorrow, or I take Daniel." The line went dead, but the words lingered sharp as knives. Her knees buckled and she collapsed against the wall, color draining from her face. The air left her lungs in broken gasps as if the threat had stolen her breath. Sophia rushed to her side, arms wrapping tightly as Rachel trembled uncontrollably. The two clung together, sobbing openly, the weight of the ultimatum crushing them both. In the distance, Harlan's hand froze over his notebook, then clenched it so hard the spine bent. He wrote nothing, for there was nothing left to record. This was no longer rumor, no longer suspicion. This was a death sentence written in menace, and he was watching it unfold before his eyes. The deadline had been set. That night, Rachel sat at a small table, the dim light casting her shadow long across the wall. She scrawled the safe code over and over on scraps of paper, her hand trembling, sweat soaking through the page until the numbers blurred. Each attempt was slower, shakier, yet she refused to stop. Across from her, Sophia kept her eyes on the clock, marking each minute with a steady voice. 12 minutes. That's all we'll have. No more. The calculation repeated a mantra to drown out fear. They rehearsed not just a theft, but survival hands moving as if the practice itself could dull the terror. But the weight never lifted. Each repetition tightened the grip of fate, dragging them closer to the act. In the corner, Harlan lingered unseen, his chest heavy with dread. He should intervene, stop them before it was too late. Yet something in their desperation chained him in place. His heart knew they weren't criminals. They were drowning. Alone in the restroom, Harlan stared at his reflection, the dim light carving deeper lines into his face. The janitor's disguise hung loose, but it was his eyes that betrayed him, tired, conflicted, dark with indecision. His thoughts whispered like a war within. Call the police. Save the company. End this before it begins. Then another voice, quieter but stronger. Help them. Save the girls. Save Daniel. He gripped the sink veins taut in his hands as the clock on the wall ticked, each second thudding into his chest like a countdown to disaster. He felt the weight of every life balanced on his decision, the theater, the staff, Rachel, Sophia, a sick boy in a hospital bed. Sweat traced his temple as his jaw tightened. Tomorrow night was set, inevitable, closing in like a storm. The question was no longer whether the robbery would happen. The question was who he would choose to be when it did. The hour of decision had arrived. The final audience drifted out into the night, their laughter fading as the theater doors closed behind them. Silence fell heavy across the empty lobby. Rachel wiped the sweat from her palms onto her uniform, her eyes locking with Sophia's. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The clock on the wall glowed 10:40. Right on cue, Mike the guard slipped out the side exit for his nightly smoke. Rachel's chest tightened as the chance arrived exactly as planned. Sophia's nod was sharp, almost mechanical. Together they moved quickly, every step rehearsed, every second carved into their minds. The air around them buzzed with tension, thick with fear and urgency. Their hands shook, but their pace did not falter. This was it, the moment that would either save Daniel or destroy them both. In the shadows of the corridor, Harlan gripped the mop handle, his pulse hammering. He knew he was watching the opening act of a night that could not be undone. The countdown had begun. Rachel's fingers hovered above the keypad, slick with sweat. She punched in the numbers carved into her memory, each beep echoing louder than the last. Then came the sound click. The safe released with a hollow snap. She pulled the door open and froze. The stacks of cash were thin, far thinner than expected. Half the money was gone. Her heart thudded, panic flaring in her chest. Sophia leaned in, eyes wide, horror spilling across her face. "It's not here." Derek took it. He already took it. The words rattled like broken glass. Rachel's knees wavered, the hope she clung to unraveling in an instant. The risk, the plan, the fear, it was all for nothing. The safe was supposed to hold salvation, but instead, it revealed betrayal. Behind them, the theater groaned in silence as though the walls themselves understood the injustice. Rachel's lips parted, but no sound came. What they had braced themselves for was only half the truth. Something worse was waiting. Footsteps thundered down the hallway, sharper than any alarm. Rachel spun, her stomach plunging. Derek's silhouette filled the doorway, his muttering low but clear. "Hand it over. Victor's men won't wait." The words sliced through the air, colder than the night outside. Rachel and Sophia froze, their eyes darting to one another, disbelief painted across their faces. Derek wasn't just cruel, wasn't just corrupt, he was feeding their tormentor. Harlan lurked deeper in the shadows, breath caught, heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. He had suspected theft, mismanagement, neglect. But this partnership with Kane Betrayal, this deep, hollowed him out in an instant. Rachel's body trembled, the weight of the revelation crushing her chest. Sophia's nails dug into her arm, a silent plea to stay silent. Derek's hand tightened around his keys, oblivious to the witnesses behind him. The safe, the missing money, the threats, it all locked into place. The truth was out. Derek wasn't just the disease rotting the theater. He was feeding the predator at its door. Rachel's breath caught in her throat, panic tightening around her like chains. "Sophia, we have to run now." Her whisper cracked, urgent, frantic, but Sophia grabbed her wrist, eyes blazing with grim resolve. "No, we're here already. We finished this." The defiance in her tone clashed against Rachel's terror, pulling them in opposite directions even as their hands stayed locked together. Then the sound they dreaded came, Derek's voice sharp as a whip. His head turned, his eyes narrowing at the faint movement in the dark. "Who's there?" His tone was not suspicion. It was fury. Rachel froze, her body pressed against the cold wall, lungs refusing to draw air. Sophia stood stiff beside her, face pale, but her grip did not loosen. The silence grew unbearable, broken only by Derek's heavy footsteps drawing closer. The space around them shrank until every sound felt deafening. Their secret, their plan, their fear, all now teetered on the brink of discovery. Before Derek's glare could sweep the hallway, another figure emerged from the shadows. The mop dropped first, clattering against the floor. Then the cap came off, revealing a face both familiar and impossible. "I'm Harlan West." His words cut through the silence like lightning through a storm. Derek's eyes bulged, disbelief strangling his voice. "You... here." His arrogance collapsed in an instant, his face draining of color as recognition struck. Behind him, Rachel and Sophia went rigid, every muscle seized in shock. Their secret now lay bare before the very man who owned everything around them. The room thickened with stillness, a weight no one could break. For years, Harlan had been a name whispered with respect, unreachable, untouchable. And now he stood here in plain sight in a janitor's uniform, confronting betrayal in its rawest form. The mask had fallen, and with it came the truth. The air froze, the theater itself holding its breath. Derek's composure snapped back in a desperate attempt at survival. He jabbed a finger at the girls. "They're the thieves. I caught them red-handed." His voice cracked, stretched thin by fear. Harlan didn't flinch. His gaze was calm but sharp enough to pierce. "Enough. I've seen everything. I have records. I have proof." Derek faltered, his protest dying in his throat. Then Harlan's voice hardened. "Security." The command rang out final and absolute. From the end of the hall, two officers appeared, their boots pounding against the tiles. Derek stepped back, hands flailing as they closed in. "You can't do this. I run this place." His shouts grew thinner as his arms were wrenched behind him. The girls watched, stunned, as the man who had terrorized them was finally powerless. His voice shrank into echoes, curses swallowed by the night. For the first time in too long, the balance shifted. Fear loosened its grip. Justice had finally taken hold. Rachel's knees buckled, the weight of everything crashing down at once. She dropped to the floor, her voice breaking into sobs. "Please, forgive me." Her words spilled out raw, torn from a heart that had carried too much for too long. Sophia knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her friend, holding her tight as if she could shield her from the shame. Harlan stood over them, his stance rigid, his gaze unyielding until his eyes softened. The fury that had driven him moments before faded, replaced by something deeper. "I know everything," he said, his tone steady but gentle. "You are not criminals." The words fell into the silence like a lifeline. Both girls looked up, their tear-streaked faces, stunned eyes wide with disbelief. It was impossible to reconcile. The owner they had feared was standing before them, not with condemnation, but with understanding. Their breaths caught their grief, paused as the ground beneath them shifted from despair to fragile hope. Harlan lowered himself to their level, his voice carrying the weight of years. "I was once like you," he said quietly. "Poor, desperate. My mother was sick, and I worked every hour I could to keep her alive." The memories pressed into his face, softening the lines hardened by power. "I was ready to give up, but the man who owned the theater back then, he gave me a chance. Not judgment, a chance." His eyes searched theirs, not for excuses, but for truth. Rachel's sobs caught in her throat, breaking into hiccuped gasps, her tears flowing faster at the echo of her own story in his. Sophia clutched her tighter, but tears blurred her own eyes as well. Hope, faint but real, flickered inside the hollowed places of their hearts. Harlan's tone steadied stronger now. "Tonight, it's my turn. I carry that gift forward. I will not let desperation define you." The words planted roots in the silence, growing into something neither girl had dared believe in: redemption. The room was still the only sound, Rachel's trembling breath as she fumbled for her phone. Her hands shook as she pulled up the messages, her body braced as if even the screen might wound her again. "Here," she whispered, holding it out. Harlan took it, scanning the vile threats, the photo of Daniel's fragile body in a hospital bed. His jaw tightened, but he nodded once. "This ends tonight." His voice carried no hesitation, only certainty. Rachel blinked, disbelief cutting through her fear. You'll really help us?" Her words wavered, caught between gratitude and suspicion. Harlan looked straight at her, eyes firm. "This is your second chance. Don't waste it." Silence wrapped around them, thick and trembling. For the first time, Rachel felt the grip of fear loosen. Sophia leaned against her, both of them overwhelmed by the truth taking shape in front of them. The choice was no longer theirs alone. Harlan had entered the fight, and with him came a force stronger than despair. Harlan's voice was steady, each word delivered like a command carved in stone. "Move now. Arrest Victor Kane." The reply was immediate, sirens flaring through the receiver, distant but sharp like the sound of justice breaking chains. Rachel's knees buckled, her body surrendering under the sudden release of fear. She collapsed, but Sophia caught her, holding her tight as tears poured freely from them both. Relief crashed over them in waves, louder than any sob, heavier than any burden they had carried. For months they had lived on the edge of terror, every hour hunted by threats that gnawed at their souls. Now, with one phone call, the shadow dissolved. The darkness that had held them hostage broke apart, replaced by something so foreign it felt unreal: safety. Their cries filled the room, no longer cries of despair, but of survival. Harlan stepped back, giving them space, his chest rising with quiet resolve. The predator was finished. The girls were free. And dawn, for the first time, felt possible. A month passed, and the theater breathed with life again. The walls no longer echoed with fear, but with laughter and steady voices. Employees smiled without force, their greetings carrying warmth instead of exhaustion. Customers lingered longer, drawn by an atmosphere that finally welcomed them. Jason stood behind the counter, his uniform crisp, his grin genuine, as he counted the bills from a paycheck that finally reflected his worth. Rachel moved through the lobby in her new blazer, a badge pinned proudly to her chest, assistant manager. She checked receipts, offered advice, and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had survived the storm. Nearby, Sophia walked the aisles, tablet in hand, monitoring the upgraded security cameras she now managed. Each screen glowed sharp and clear, blind spots erased, safety restored. The air inside the theater pulsed with renewal, a place once broken, now pieced together with dignity. Harlan stood in silence, watching the seeds of trust he had planted grow into something stronger. On a sunny afternoon, Daniel rolled through the lobby in his wheelchair, his thin frame brighter now, his face carrying a smile that lit the room. He clapped for his sister as she guided a new employee at the concession stand, his voice ringing with unguarded pride. "That's my sister." He beamed his words loud enough for everyone to hear. Rachel knelt down, handing him a fresh box of popcorn, still warm and fragrant. "One day, you'll stand up and get this yourself," she said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. His small hands gripped the box tightly, eyes shining with belief. Around them, staff and customers paused, touched by the scene that needed no explanation. It wasn't just popcorn. It was hope tangible and alive, handed from sister to brother in a place that had once nearly broken them both. Sophia stood nearby, her eyes wet, smiling through tears. What once was despair had turned into promise, and the theater itself seemed to glow with it. The headline stretched across the morning paper: Victor Kane, sentenced to 20 years. Harlan's eyes lingered on the bold print, his breath releasing in a slow exhale he hadn't realized he was holding. The predator, who had haunted his employees, who had thrived on despair, was finally caged. He folded the paper carefully, placing it aside with a finality that echoed inside him. "My company will never live under shadows again." He murmured, his tone not just a promise but a vow. Resolve sharpened his gaze, a steady light replacing the storms of the past weeks. As he sat back, employees passed by with bright smiles, greeting him with respect that was no longer forced but earned. For the first time in years, Harlan felt not like a distant figurehead but a leader among equals. Justice had been delivered, and with it came peace. The theater buzzed with anticipation as Rachel and Sophia stood before their colleagues, shoulders squared, voices steady. "From today, we're launching the Emergency Assistance Fund," Rachel announced, "so no one here will ever have to face desperation alone again." Applause erupted, cheers rising from every corner of the room. Smiles spread like wildfire across faces that once only knew exhaustion. Hope had become policy, not just a dream. At the back of the room, Harlan watched quietly, pride swelling in his chest. His smile was small but full, the kind reserved for moments when words were not enough. "You've grown," he thought, his heart lighter than it had been in decades. The company no longer needed him to fight alone. The next generation had taken the torch, turning scars into strength, fear into inspiration. The roar of the staff's approval made clear this theater was no longer broken, it was reborn. Harlan paused at the doorway, the theater glowing behind him, alive with voices and laughter. Above the marquee blazed bright, but his eyes drifted to the small sign beneath "Join Our Family." Every story matters. He lingered on the words, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. This, he whispered, is the legacy worth leaving. The weight of years, the battles fought, the shadows endured, all of it felt lighter now. Ahead stretched not just a company reborn, but a community rooted in kindness. With steady steps, he walked forward, carrying with him the promise of beginnings yet to come.